Let me introduce our first speaker. Amanda Dillon is the field ecologist and entomologist at the Albany Pine Bush Preserve Commission. She is going to be talking to us about tracking and tagging eastern towhees. Thank you and welcome.
I don't know about you, but I'm not super in bird mode yet. But thanks for joining me this morning. I'm going to give kind of more of a technical talk because I thought that this audience would appreciate hearing about kind of more of the nitty gritty stuff with managing a node network and putting tags on eastern towhees. So just to start out, I wanted to give you a little bit introduction of where I work. So in case you're unfamiliar, the Albany Pine Bush Preserve is located in the Capital Region in New York State between the cities of Albany and Schenectady. And it's got this real cool glacial foundation. It's the result of a glacial lake that was there. So in that picture on the left or on the right there, you can see the outline of that glacial lake. And then these kind of sandy colored, salmon colored areas are where there were these sandy deposits that were left at the bottom of that lake. So we got sand, and then we're kind of unique in the Albany Pine Bush because we had these prevailing winds between the Adirondacks and the Catskills that blew that sand into this inland parabolic dune field. So there's some cool things. We got sand, we got an inland dune field, and then the vegetation community that got established on that was what we call this northeastern interior pine barrens. There are a lot of vegetation communities embedded within that ecosystem, and the one that we're really working to restore and maintain on the landscape is an inland pitch pine scrub oak barrens. The reason being is that's a globally rare habitat. There are less than 5 occurrences in the state and less than 20 occurrences globally, and the one in the Albany Pine Bush Preserve is considered to be one of the best remaining examples. So that's what we're really working to restore and maintain on the landscape. It is a disturbance-dependent habitat, so we use prescribed fire to maintain that habitat and restore that habitat. There are other communities also embedded in that ecosystem, like pine barrens, vernal ponds. And I also have to give a shout out to our Kerner blue butterfly. That's our federally listed species in the preserve that we're working to restore. Back in its heyday, so after that glacial lake drained and that sand was blown up and this community got established, we think the pine bush was about 25,000 to 50,000 acres in size. We don't have quite that much left preserved. I'm just going to show you a picture here from 1952 of the preserve area. This is kind of the central area. You can actually see some old fires on here. So you see some black areas from where wildfires occurred. I'm just going to overlay an image from 2022 to show you that land use change in the area. So we've got about 3,400 acres protected as part of the preserve right now. So most of that acreage of that 25,000 acres was lost to development. You can see lots of homes and businesses. We've got the Albany Rack Road Waste Management Facility plunked right in the middle there. We've got the interstate, Route 90, cutting it north and south. So what we have left is kind of postage stamp of what it used to be, and it's very fragmented. But despite that, it does support a lot of rare wildlife. So since 1980, we've documented 74 species of greatest conservation need in the preserve. So it does have this preponderance of rare and declining wildlife. And of those 74 species, 46 of those are bird species. So that means that we do a lot of bird work in the preserve. And all of that has also gained us designation both as a New York State DEC bird conservation area and an Audubon important bird area. So these are some of the criteria that we met in order to meet those designations. So as we all know, birds are really good indicators of habitat change and habitat quality. So we do a lot of research with them to look and see if our restoration efforts are working. So this is just kind of a list here. So we do bird point counts. This is our map over here of our point count stations. So we've been doing those for many years. And using that information, we can kind of figure out which species are where. We can get a rough estimate of abundance. We also have a pretty robust community science program. So we have volunteers that help us monitor for eastern whippoorwill, American woodcock, and common nighthawk flying over in the fall. We've done some really targeted efforts with species that are particularly good indicators of this habitat. So species like prairie warbler and most recently eastern whippoorwill. And we do run banding stations. We run a summer map station in the preserve, and we also run a fall migration station and a northern saw-whet owl banding station. So for this research, we wanted to pick one particular species. So we went with the eastern towhee. So why the towhee? I mean, I think they're a pretty charismatic bird. But We found in our point count research that these were one of our best indicators of high quality pitch pine scrub oak barrens. So along with the prairie warbler and the eastern whippoorwill, these guys were really good indicators of that type of habitat that we're trying to restore and maintain. And also, this is a species that we have some concern about. The breeding bird survey trends up here on this map on the right showed declines over the 1966 to 2012 period. So it is a shrubland bird that is in decline. So we wanted to do some work with this species, and we worked with cellular tracking technologies to set up this automated node grid. But the first thing we needed to do was pick a location. So this is a region of the preserve where we decided we wanted to locate our node grid. The purple star there is where our Motus Tower is located. So your node grid needs to be within 1.5 kilometers of your Motus Tower. So this is some of our highest quality pitch pine scrub oak barrens out here. So we thought this would be a great place. So we laid out our node network. So the nodes can be 2 to 250 meters apart. We erred on the side of caution and went with 150 meter spacing. So I laid these points out in ArcMap, just made a grid and put the points at the intersection. So it looks real nice, right? But then we have some other things to think about when we're placing these in the landscape. So this is a 2-foot contour of that particular area. And now we see again that parabolic dune field, right? So we have to take that into account. We don't have a nice flat landscape. And so anytime we have that kind of topography, it could interfere with the signal. So we got that to think about. And then we also have the vegetation to think about. So some of these areas are particularly open. So the orangey kind of lighter colors are more open areas. And then those dark green areas are pretty dense pitch pine stands. So in addition to the topography, you also have to think about the vegetation, because anytime you have a lot of vegetation that's over the top of your nodes, you might have some signal interference. So all that's to say that, you know, our nice node grid that looked all nice and beautiful ended up looking more like this. They got squished and moved around a little bit to maximize our chances of having them all function correctly. So just a couple notes about the node grid. So the nodes they're automated telemetry units. They're super awesome. But we did find that there was a little bit of troubleshooting. And one of the things that I found in my experience is that it's really handy to make sure before you take them out to the field that you have the most up-to-date firmware on them. So you can date them before you take them in the field. One other thing that we found we needed to do in our particular area, given that vegetation and that topography, was we needed to boost the signal. We found some were having a little trouble connecting, so we just kind of went in and we boosted the signal on all of them. Now, we did find that some of these nodes did still have trouble getting a GPS fix, and that unfortunately is a going out in the field fix. You have to go out in the field with a laptop and hook up to the node and then force fix the GPS on it. We had to do that for maybe like 1 to 5 of the nodes. Most of them would get a GPS fix. And obviously we have them GPSed, so it's not a huge deal if they don't get a GPS fix. It just makes things a little bit messier when processing the data. So this is what our nodes looked like. We used U-bend or U-posts and 8-foot steel conduit. And then I didn't know this until I found out that you can buy metal zip ties, and they're holding up really well. So we just use metal zip ties to secure those poles to the fence posts, and you can actually slide the poles out, mount the node on the top, and then just slide it right back in. And so we take our nodes out in the winter time. They don't, as far as I know, Dave will probably talk more about it, but they don't do too well over winter. So we bring them in over winter. So this is a nice system. You can leave those poles all out there so your nodes are permanently located, and you can just pull that pole out to install them. All right, so that's some nitty gritty about the node network. For the tags, we use this Stretch Magic jewelry cord. We use 0.7 millimeter. I think you can use smaller or bigger cord depending on the bird species that you're working with. We found that the 0.7 millimeter worked really well for the towies. And we did use this hypo cement just to secure the knots, because we didn't want the knots to come undone. So after the tags were tied, we put a little drop of that cement on there just to secure that knot. And this is kind of a schematic that my coworker came up with for actually how he constructed the harnesses for the tags. These were CTT life tags that we worked with first. So you can see he's done all kinds of crazy geometry here, but we ended up, we tested tag lengths. So there's 2 leg loops on the sides. These are leg loop mounted, so these tags sit right on the rump of the bird. And these 2 leg loops on each side, we tried sizes from 22 millimeters up to 25 millimeters. We found that the 23 millimeters seemed to be the sweet spot that really fit all of the towies. And even when we tried multiple sizes, it usually ended up being the 23 millimeters. So that's kind of the size that we settled on for the Eastern towies. And so up here on the left side here, we've got the life tags. So we started with these life tags in 2021. Last year, we teamed with Shelley and the Northeast Modus Collaborative to put on some hybrid tags on towies. So those are the 2 different tags. You can see this one, obviously all of this excess plastic here, these are kind of sent so that you can size them for however you need for the animal that you're working with. So we use the lowest holes and we cut off the top and we cut it nice and smooth because you don't want any sharp edges or points or anything that are going to irritate the bird. So here are those 2 tags on some Eastern towhees. Now, as far as catching the towies, they definitely lured me into a false sense of security in the first season. We pretty easily caught 10 birds and deployed 10 tags, built up a lot of confidence. And then I don't know if they all talked on the wintering grounds or what happened, but we got 10 more tags for 2022 and I was able to catch 2 birds. So part of that has a lot to do with the fact that our habitat is disturbance dependent. So we're regularly doing management. And so that leaves the nets really exposed. And if there are any trees around and there isn't any shrubs down low, the birds basically will just bounce back and forth in the trees. So you really need some low shrubby vegetation in order to kind of get them in. I'll say also that in our experience from our map station, we think there are way more towies out there than we're getting in our nets. So we kind of theorize that they're really good at self-extracting. So for our target netting, we actually switched from our usually 30 millimeter mesh nets to we used our owl nets, our 60 millimeter mesh nets. And we found that worked a little bit better. We had less bounce outs with that bigger mesh size. And we were right there too. So we got them out quick. To lure them in, we used Box Pros. We have the NX4. There are some fancier versions. I would have appreciated a remote. We had multiple calls that we could kind of cycle through and just a towhee song, but then we could play chip notes and aggravated notes to try and get them to come in. And it would have been really handy to just have a remote. Some of these recorders have remotes so that you don't have to keep walking up to the net. But that's kind of our setup late in the season. Last year, when we were kind of struggling to catch birds, we did try to set up a visual lure. We had a little kind of stuffed towhee. I don't really think it made much of a difference. But ultimately, we were able to get some tags on. So our first year in 2021, our friends group got a grant from 3M in order to purchase our first 10 tags. And like I said, those went on easy peasy. We caught 10 birds like that. Our second year, we got 10 more tags thinking, yeah, we got this. And we caught 2 birds. So yeah, it's a bit of a struggle trying to catch them out there, especially when we're getting to more and more marginal habitat, I think. And then this past year, as I mentioned, we teamed up with Shelley Eshelman and the Northeast Modus Collaborative to put on some hybrid tags, which was really cool because one of the things I also learned in putting on these life tags was, I thought this is great. We're going to get to see local data, how these birds are using the habitat here, but we're also going to see them migrate, right? Really cool. Well, they're solar tags. They don't have batteries and most birds migrate at night. So for a while there, I kept checking Modus, like, when are my tags going to show up on some other Modus station? And then I realized they're flying at night and their tags aren't working. So these tags are cool because they do work at night. So this is one, I think this was a hatchier female that we caught, and she hit 11 towers going south. And I'm kind of excited to see if they hit any towers as they come back north this spring. Just a couple notes, we did recatch the birds sometimes accidentally, sometimes intentionally, just to see what the tags look like. These are some of those hybrid tags. So we did have some interesting, the first year's tags looked really good. I don't know if these had different antenna material, but the birds were kind of chewing on those antennas and clearly like kind of coiling them around, but both these tags were functioning. And they were light enough weight that we didn't think that they were going to catch on vegetation and stuff because they're very, very lightweight. In fact, that's one of the reasons I think they're able to get kinked with that. But for the most part, hopefully this plays. So this is one of our eastern towies that we caught in 2021. So it's one of our original tag birds. This is him in 2022, but he actually came back last year as well. So this guy's been on his same territory for wearing his tag for 3 seasons now. So this was just me checking out. I wanted to see if he had any calluses, any redness, or any irritation at all from that tag. So he's been wearing the tag a year at this point, and it looks like I put it on the day before. So I was very happy with how this bird looked. Yeah, the tags sit really well, and we're really surprised with how long they're lasting as well. I think we kind of thought, based in talking with other researchers, that we might get 2 years, and that would probably be the harness material that would break down. So we've got 3 seasons of data on this guy. So far, so good. Also, it was kind of fun to see these guys and know who you were looking at. But this guy was particularly interesting. I hope this plays the sound. It's not gonna work. But this guy was particularly interesting, and I can try to play if you want to hear it after, I'll play the video for you. But this guy had a mouthful of food. He's one of our tag birds, and he was doing a blue jay call note. So he was sitting here alternating between a drink and a blue jay call. And we theorized that maybe because he was about to feed its young, he was trying to distract other birds. And of course, the blue jays are, nest predators. So maybe he was trying to convince the blue jays he was a blue jay and leave him alone. I don't know, but got to see some cool stuff like that. Oh, it did work?
If you just hit the right
arrow key?
No, it's only hit the play button.
Oh, there goes. Oh, it's very quiet.
That's crazy stuff on the computer. Yeah, that's in. Wow. Wow. That's awesome.
Isn't that? For the longest time, I sat there looking for the blue jay. I was like, well, you better be careful, buddy. There's a blue jay around. And I was like, oh, so just a cool anecdote from the study. So now let's get into the nitty gritty. What does this data look like? So if you look up at the top here, you can see the dates. So this is just 2 days worth of data. So this is from June 15th, 2021 to June 17th, 2021. So just an incredible amount of data. In that time with human power, you would have expected over that time to maybe get 4 or 5 points, right? It's a lot of work to go out there and triangulate. So this is incredible. You can kind of see on this map too, these little black dots, those are the nodes. So the node network communicates back to the MODIS station, and it creates these points. The point is based on the signal strength and the distance. So one thing we don't really know is how that signal drops off with distance. So this is all very raw data. So I'm just going to click through here just to show you what this data kind of looks like over time. So we're still in June. We're interested in whether these guys are maintaining territories, because it really sounds like they're on top of each other. It kind of looks like they are too. But we're also really interested in how they're going to use the managed landscape. How are they going to move? They come back and find that a prescribed fire has taken place in their territory. How's that going to shuffle how those birds move around the landscape? So you can see that this is, kind of exciting. Those are questions that we're going to be able to answer, hopefully, with this data. So we jumped ahead to July here. Here's August. And then you can see these points starting to drop off here in October. Now, I mentioned that we don't really know how that signal strength varies with distance. So last year, we decided to try, and we called it calibrate the node network. And we did that based on this paper. I highly recommend checking out this paper by Paxton et al. From 2022. They called it optimizing trilateration estimates. So basically, you go out to each of your nodes and you stand at a node location at your nodes, and then you record the time that you're there, and you compare your node location for that tag to what the MODIS network or the node network says. So we went out to each of our nodes, and we went in the cardinal directions in 10, 25, 50, and 75 meter distances away from the nodes in each of the cardinal directions. We had the tag mounted on kind of a fake bird on top of a PVC pole. So we would stand at each one of those points for 5 minutes. So that way we can compare those known locations to where the node network says it is. And basically what we'll find is when that signal starts to drop off, and then we'll truncate all that data and move those points that don't really have a lot of integrity. So that's the idea. We haven't done, obviously, it's an incredible amount of data to work with. So we're still working on processing all of that. Hopefully this was helpful for you guys. And I'm happy to try and answer any questions.
Good morning.
Morning.
I am not your president. My name is Maureen Gimple and I'm the secretary of the Eastern Bird Banding Association currently. Our president usually runs this business meeting and she had to step out today, so I am filling in. We're gonna make this pretty fast and sweet and painless. Go over a little bit of business of the past year, some things we need members to vote on. And so everybody's welcome to stay. Nobody try and leave. I could block the door. But only current members of EBBA can vote when we get to voting things. Which brings me to my first, how do we advance? Which button? Arrow? It should be in. Stupid.
Oh, there it goes.
Okay. Which is, hi, some of you are not members of EBBA. For $35 a year, you can go to our website, sign up, pay online, mail a check, and join us. We have a quarterly journal that comes out 4 times a year, quarters. You got early bird registration opportunities to be in this meeting if you remember. Sense of camaraderie, meeting other banders. We hope everybody finds value in being here this weekend. And so there's also student memberships that are cheaper than $35. There's household memberships, and you can be a life member. You can pay a little more upfront and join us for the rest of your life. So please, if you're not a member, please consider joining us. We do need volunteers to help us do this. Ariane just thanked a few of us, but putting together a meeting like this and keeping this organization running all year is a huge task. And basically a dozen of us are doing all of it. So we don't always do a great job about reaching out to the members, but there are definitely ways you could all help us. We always need to help with websites and social media. Maybe you want to review articles for our journal. And if you're super ambitious, you could join council. So we're going to get to elections at the end of my spiel here, but I don't know everybody here. And so maybe you have good ideas and time and want something on your resume and want to give back. If you're curious about what it's like to be on council, we all have council at the bottom of our name tags. So talk to any of us about what it involves, and you can get on our radar to join us next year. When we used to do these meetings, we would go through like a huge giant agenda. We've streamlined that a little bit. So last year's minutes from this meeting were approved at our council meeting that we held immediately after that meeting. Those are available to any member that wants to see them. So I, as the secretary, have them. And there'll be meeting minutes from this meeting, which anybody wants to see minutes, you can see the minutes. Then we used to go through the whole list of all the officers and all the committee reports. And basically, I've really condensed these down. Most roles on the council, people are sort of serving more than one purpose. And so we sort of lump some of this together. So the first vice president of EBBA is the person that runs the meeting. And so next year's meeting, we don't have an exact date yet, but in 2025, we do have a location. And we're going to be in Kiowa, South Carolina. So if you're from the Northeast and you want to be somewhere warm where there's maybe painted buntings or ibis, keep a lookout. As soon as we have those dates fixed, we'll put them on our social media and on our website. And Aaron Given is the person that's going to run that meeting. So if you have questions or ideas or tips, you can corner him about next year's meeting. We have the Eastern Bird Banding Association has an editor who happens to also fill 2 roles. He is also the production coordinator for our journal, the North American Bird Bander. If he were here, he would tell me to tell you that you need to write manuscripts for this journal. This is a super good entry level into publishing. Maybe you think this is daunting and scary and you don't know how to do it. Reach out, people can help you. If you do a feature manuscript, it is literature cited, it is peer reviewed, like a more well-known journal. But there's also a section for news, note, and comment. Maybe nobody's published about towies with curlicue antennas. Maybe nobody's published a note about sexing brown creepers based on bill curvature, right? Like as banders, we're the ones in the field that see things. And a lot of those kinds of observations and notes are not what the major journals are looking for. This is a perfect place for any like banding tips and tricks or things you've noticed or things you want feedback about. A current issue that's percolating a little bit is whether size 0 bands are still too big for some birds. And so the bander that brought it to our attention was like, hey, what does everybody think? And we were like, NAB, put it in NAB. Let's see what everybody thinks. So there's always a need for more content for this journal. And we circulated through our email distribution list a survey to members about what you value about NAB, if you have any suggestions. And part of that was like, do you have an idea, but you need help? Like, reach out to anybody on council. We can direct you to the people who can help you publish in this journal. One of what I think is one of the key functions that EBBA does is we do give out research grants. So they're called the memorial grants. The money comes from the memorial fund. This year, 2 grants were given out. This is my old slide where, it does have their names. These are generally grad students, but not always. They're open to anybody that wants to apply. So the deadline is usually in mid-January, sort of enough time for the committee to review them before this year's meeting. I should also pause here to say that the bucket raffle, in addition to all the things you didn't know you needed to take home, we now use the proceeds from the bucket raffle to supplement these grant awards. So if you have a project, you need a little funding, you know someone that needs a little funding, keep an eye out sort of January of the coming year for that application. Okay. This is one super technical thing we do here. The way officers and council members are elected in EBBA, there's a nominating committee. We put together a slate. We present the slate of officers and councilors to the council, who has approved this slate yesterday at our council meeting, but this needs to be voted on by the membership. So we have a officer sort of a session plan. So whoever is voted in as 3rd vice president, generally then the following year serves as 2nd vice president and then 1st vice president and then president. So we find basically a new person each year to volunteer to be 3rd vice president. This year, normally there are 4 people in a council class that serve 3-year terms. We had some people resign, so we had a couple of people to fill in this year. So this is the slate of people. We do accept nominations from the floor. So if anybody wants to nominate yourself or someone else, as long as you are a member who has paid your dues up to date, I'll do a dramatic pause. I've never seen nominations from the floor since I've been coming, but they are allowed. And if anybody doesn't know any of these people, we should all stand. Everybody that's on council, stand and wave. So these are like your current council people. So you can corner any of us if you have questions. Okay. Ted. You can. We have a motion to accept the slate as presented. Do we have a second for that motion? Ooh, a million. Okay, if you are an EBBA member and you are in favor of this slate, I think we can just do voice vote by aye. Aye. Any opposed? Abstained? Okay, the slate was now official. Welcome to our new team members. Some of them are here. Okay, then, okay, so then our last piece of new business, this is gonna be kind of technical, or if there's any policy folks. EBBA functions with a set of bylaws. Those bylaws were last amended in 2016. And the council over the years has found a few more things about them that we wished we could tweak. So this past year, we had a team of folks who reviewed our bylaws, and Clifford Barrick is gonna talk to you all on behalf of his team about the proposed bylaw changes, which council also did approve yesterday, but need to be voted on by you, the members, today. Good enough intro?
Great, thank you. I'm actually going to try this without, if I may. Is that-
You should probably use the mic.
Okay, I'll try.
I'll hover in case of questions.
So hi, everybody, welcome. I'm Clifford Barrick from New Jersey. I've been serving on council for 3 years. And I've just been nominated to third vice president.
You just been elected.
Yeah.
Elected. Thank you. So I'm going to give a very brief overview of what we found and the solutions that we came up with in order to change these bylaws. And I'm going to do it as quickly as we can because we all want to hear the speakers. We definitely don't want to hear it from me. And so this is the report from the bylaws.
Oh, shoot. Sorry.
That's
Technical.
okay.
Extended screen gets me every time.
So let me just start with two generic thoughts and findings that the committee came up with. The first is that bylaws are not static. Everybody always believes bylaws are sort of this written, very important document that cannot be changed. And in discussions amongst the 4 members of the committee, as well as many other counselors, even some that are retired, we found that the bylaws are a tool. And if a tool doesn't work, you fix it, you oil it. In a worst case scenario, you replace it with a better, more technological version. And so that's basically what we're trying to do here.
Yes.
Oh, thanks.
Work.
Okay. This it's even better.
Only there.
Okay.
Sorry.
The other thing that I just wanted to very briefly talk about is that up to this point, EBBA has been an organization that works within the bylaws. That's actually backwards. What we really want to do is we should have bylaws that fit the organization. Council spends a lot of time trying to figure out how can we get something done and still maintain the bylaws. And if the bylaws are a tool and they're not working, we should change them. Because the bylaws are not static, what we are proposing is that we try this, road test it for a year, and at next year's meeting, if there's anything that doesn't work or needs to be tweaked, we can do that. So this isn't a really final thing. Okay. The committee was tasked basically with 3 things. First, read the bylaws. How many of you have read the bylaws? Show of hands. More than I thought. That's what I think. The next thing we did was start analyzing. We started making lists, what works, what doesn't work, how effective are they, how much time do we have to spend getting around things. And then we made recommendations. And the first recommendations that we made were to council, and now we're making the same recommendations to you guys. These are the committee members. There were 4 of us. I definitely want to shout out to the many current and past council members who had a voice in this. We really tried to reach out and be as inclusive as we possibly could. So what are bylaws? I'll start by apologizing to any lawyers in the room. This is my definition, not a lawyer, not an economist. It's basically simply an agreement of what your purpose is and how you're going to go about conducting your business. How are you going to talk to each other? It's a set of rules. They obviously must conform to state law. We are, in fact, incorporated in the state of New Jersey as a nonprofit. And so we are bound by those laws, state of New Jersey only. And we already talked a little bit about this being a tool that needs to be used. So what did we find? We found 6 things, basically. We kind of lumped them together. The first is that they use this really outdated language. A bunch of lawyers wrote this probably 50, 100 years ago. We spent a lot of time just trying to translate, what does this thing mean? Here's our solution. Get rid of the big words, write it in English, update all pronouns. It's 2024. And get rid of the Roman numerals. The second finding that we had was, how'd that get in there? So logo, we love our logo. It's really nice. There's a description of the logo in the bylaws. Doesn't belong there. These are things that we want to keep, written down. They simply don't belong in the bylaws. So we remove them and we place them elsewhere. That's basically it. Were we to want to change this logo, we would actually have to change the bylaws. That makes no sense. Okay, so findings number 3. We found no record of any lawyer ever looking at these bylaws. It's a legal document. We are all bound by it. So the very first thing we did, we found a nice retired lawyer from New Jersey, my ex-executive director, sent it to him, got it reviewed and approved. He sent back a whole bunch of different recommendations that would bring it into compliance with New Jersey state law. Finding number 4, nothing in there about non-discrimination. Nothing that says we will accept members of any color, any sex, any orientation. What did we do? Article 4.6. It's in there. Finding number 5, no indemnification or liability insurance for the officers. What this means is that if I perform my duties as a counselor for EBBA, I am currently legally liable. I can be sued for my house. And as a member of council, I got to be honest with you, if that's the cost, I'm out. I should say my wife, say I'm out. So what did we do? Article 16. Officers are now indemnified. If you do something in your duties for EBBA, you are not legally responsible personally. The organization is. We also formed a committee to look into liability and insurance policies. That's currently still happening. But there is an article in there in the bylaws that simply says you are indemnified as an officer and as a member. Our last one, we had a huge honey-do list of things that got in the way. Council is overrun by work. We used to meet once a year. The bylaws very clearly state council will meet 1 time per year at this meeting. 2 years ago, 3 years ago, we decided there was too much work to be done. We now meet quarterly. Council meets quarterly. In order to do that, council must create and pass a resolution for a special meeting. For 3 of those 4 meetings, we have to jump through those hoops. What's the solution? Change the bylaws. The new bylaws simply state council will meet 4 times a year. And we've just saved ourselves a whole bunch of time and effort. So these are the basic changes that we want to make. We have copies of the new and the old right next to Allison, if anybody is interested. Basically, what we are asking is for you to vote simply to try this. Let's see what happens. If it doesn't work out, we get together next year, we tweak it and change it again. Any questions? Yes.
I was involved many years ago with bylaw revision. And I had the revised bylaws then reviewed by a New Jersey attorney.
Oh, good. Great.
On a pro bono basis, who was also the pro bono attorney for New Jersey Auto.
Was that in 2016?
Pardon?
Was that in 2016?
No, way
Way before. Oh, cool.
long before that, but they were legally reviewed.
That's great. Obviously, laws change over time, and so we want to have this reviewed every You know, period.
Another comment, we don't have a logo. The bylaws call it an emblem.
Correction me, yep, it's an emblem. Any other questions? Pregnant pause? Dramatic?
Do you want to be mandated at quarterly meetings, or can your bylaws simply say we'll have as many meetings as?
So-
or it could be from 1 to 4, or?
Again, what we're doing here is creating the tool.
Yeah.
For the foreseeable future, we want to meet quarterly.
Right.
And so we will do that. If that changes, if we need to meet more often or less often, we go back and change the bylaws. We can do this every year. It hasn't been done since, I don't recommend it, but hasn't been done since 2016. This really needs to be reviewed every 3, 4, 5 years. Any other questions? Yes.
More of a comment. I hope that there's an urgency to get that insurance, because just having the words in the bylaws will not help. So
Understand.
you guys gotta get that insurance.
Baby steps. Yep. Yeah, point well taken. We have a committee that's working on it. We have a couple of quotes. We're still trying to work out what we want in that policy. You know, insurance, it's a whole different
Right.
language. So yeah, we're working on it. The last thing I'd like to reiterate is anybody who wants, member or not, can serve on a committee. If you would like to help out with bylaws, you can do that.
All right, so then let's vote.
I guess we vote. So only EBBA members can vote. Should we do this by a showing of hands?
We need a motion.
Oh,
So I'll move that we accept the changes recommended by the committee.
I'll second that.
okay.
I think we can just
just do a voice vote?
and then we could count hands if we had to.
Okay. All those in favor, please. say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstention?
Great.
It's unanimous.
New bylaws, yay.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. My name is Brian DeGasperis. Like I said, I'm the stewardship coordinator at the Hudson River National Estuarine Research Reserve. And I'll be talking about one of our recent efforts to get a MODIS collaboration up and running in New York's Hudson Valley. And this will not be a very technical presentation. We're still very much newbies in this whole MODIS scene. So this will be more focused on kind of our experience and process with getting the network up and running. So I'm just going to start with a brief introduction of the Hudson River National Estuarine Research Reserve. I'm assuming most of you are familiar with the MODIS wildlife tracking system. So I'll just provide kind of a very broad scale overview of that, and then dive into kind of the what we've done in the Hudson Valley in terms of MODIS, how the project is going, and what we have in store lined up next for the project. So the Hudson River National Estuarine Research Reserve is one of part of a national network of 30 research reserves across the coastal states and Great Lakes that are designated to protect and study estuarine systems and collaboration with surrounding communities. The reserve system was established through the Coastal Zone Management Act. And it is a partnership between NOAA as a federal agency and coastal states. And it covers nearly 1.4 million acres of estuaries across the country. The Hudson River National Estuarine Research Reserve is New York's research reserve. It is a partnership between NOAA and the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. It was designated in 1982, and it protects about 5,000 acres at 4 distinct sites that are kind of distributed throughout the Hudson estuary. And those 4 sites are spread across much of the valley area in order to capture kind of the range of habitats and salinity gradient within the estuary. going from fresh to brackish. And our 4 sites are Stockport Flats in Columbia County, Tivoli Bays in Dutchess County, Iona Island and Piermont Marsh in Rockland County. And our headquarters are based at the Norrie Point Environmental Center in Statsburg. So the research reserves serve as field laboratories for long-term estuarine research, education, and stewardship. They are a platform where we can leverage federal funding, science and tools, and bring those to the Hudson River communities in order to move projects and conservation forward at a local level. So, as most of you probably know, the MODIS Wildlife Tracking System is a collaborative international network of community-hosted radio telemetry receivers and wildlife researchers that are designed to address a bunch of different types of animal movement questions. They are basically 2 types of frequencies on the network in the Western Hemisphere, the 166.38 megahertz low-tech annotags and the 434 megahertz CTT power tags and life tags. And basically when a tagged animal, and that's usually a bird or it could be bat or insect, flies near one of the autonomously receiving telemetry stations, it sends data to the ground-based receiver. That data is then uploaded to an online server through Birds Canada. And then that data is processed and made available publicly through the MODIS website, where it's accessible by educators, land managers, researchers, to answer a bunch of different types of questions. So how did the Research Reserve get involved with MODIS in the Hudson Valley? So at the national scale of the reserve system, we operate in biogeographic areas and regions that are critically important to many migratory species, many of which are experiencing declines due to climate change and coastal development. But despite that kind of geographic distribution and interest in wildlife tracking, relatively few of the reserve sites have, up until recently, been involved with this technology. So the formation of the Hudson Valley MODIS collaboration started in 2022 through a multi-reserve project that was led by the Ace Basin Reserve in South Carolina. And the project was designed to basically take MODIS knowledge from reserve sites that had and operated MODIS stations to reserve sites that were interested in getting involved in wildlife tracking. And so we basically started to convene a group of members at that time to kind of push forward this initiative within the Hudson Valley, hopefully addressing some of the gaps within the national system, as well as our kind of local regional system. So just to give you some context about the Hudson River Valley region, the heart of the Hudson Valley is, of course, the Hudson River, which flows 315 miles from its headwaters in the Adirondack Mountains to the Battery at the southern tip of Manhattan, where it meets the Atlantic Ocean. For 153 miles, the river is a tidal estuary, experiencing 2 high tides and 2 low tides a day. mix of salt and fresh water. And that's basically the region from Troy, just north of Albany, south to New York Harbor. The Hudson Valley itself, much of it is fairly steep topography, with mountains kind of rising up right from the shoreline of the river. Sections of it are very fjord-like. But at the same time, there are still extensive, shallow, low-lying and flat areas that are subject to that tidal action. And that forms a bunch of important habitats that are tidally influenced, including vegetated shallow water habitats, tidal wetlands, mud flats, all of which are very important for migratory and local species. So the major goal with forming this MODIS collaboration in the Hudson Valley was to try to fill in this area of red. So there is a major gap in MODIS coverage, within this section of New York, particularly in the Hudson Valley region. And so the objectives by forming a preliminary network of MODIS stations in the valley was to try to stimulate expansion of MODIS in the region, while also improving our understanding of how migratory species are utilizing the valley corridor, and therefore, and in turn, inform us on how to better manage habitats for those species. So our strategies for trying to get this MODIS collaboration up and running was to convene a group of major landowners along the river. The folks that had owned the most property along the river would kind of be the lowest hanging fruit in terms of trying to get some stations set up as a preliminary network. So we brought those folks together to assess their interests and capacity in hosting MODIS stations, and recognizing that it's a long-term commitment that we're looking for to maintain the equipment, to eventually download data. So we wanted to see who was on board and who was not on board with that process. And then again, partner with our ACE Basin Reserve in South Carolina, who again was serving as kind of a knowledge transfer entity that would then, as a group, we would kind of get together, share knowledge, provide training, and then go forth and form a network, right? Form a collaboration. So we had our kickoff meeting in the spring of 2021, and that included New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, New York State Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation, Audubon, New York, Scenic Hudson, and Columbia University's Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory. And so during that first meeting, we kind of sat down on a map and kind of sketched out kind of where our respective properties were, identified a potential list of sites that, again, were kind of low-hanging fruit that had support for potential MODIS stations. And it was a pretty productive meeting. Everybody was on board at the time and continues to be on board. So we didn't scare anybody away first meeting. We had subsequent meetings with our partners to narrow down that list of sites using a variety of evaluation processes, including viewshed analyses looking for elevation deficit and gains, the spatial distribution of sites along the estuary, any site infrastructure, interference, radio interference on the site, accessibility for maintaining and potentially downloading data. And after we went through that process, we were able to kind of winnow down our list of sites to 4 that we would target for a preliminary network. And those 4 sites are Ramshorn Marsh, which is pretty close to where we are today in Catskill. Ramshorn Marsh is a property that's owned and managed by Scenic Hudson and Audubon, New York. Our Norrie Point Environmental Center, which is again the headquarters for our research reserve. Constitution Marsh, which is managed by Audubon, New York and New York State Parks. And Piermont Pier, which is located on a building that's operated by Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory. So once we kind of narrowed down the number of sites that we wanted to install, we got together, had some fun with electronics, and had a workshop to build Modus receivers. So we were working with a fairly small startup budget for this collaboration. So our partners elected to go with the DIY receiver build option, using a sensor dome powered by a Raspberry Pi mini computer. So we did successfully construct 4 of those receivers. We did get some funding later on in the process, and we're able to purchase a pre-built CTT sensor station as well for one of our sites that we put at the Piermont Pier location. So after we had all our receivers constructed, we began in working with our partners to install them at the various sites. We started installing the receivers in 2022, and we just finished installing the last of the 4 receivers at the end of 2023. Most of the receivers are on buildings, so co-located on a building with AC power and Wi-Fi, which makes things a lot easier. One of our stations is on solar, and at this point requires manual downloading, but we may look into getting a cell modem for that site down the line. 3 out of our 4 stations are dual mode, meaning that they can detect both low-tech and CTT tags, frequency tags. We are looking to get our 4th station also up to dual mode capacity. And so now that we've installed these 4 stations, how are we doing in terms of our project objectives? So one of those primary objectives was to help, again, kind of fill in the gap within the Hudson Valley. We now have some yellow in there, so some success, right? It's not completely devoid of motor stations. But we haven't had any new stations added since our last station was installed in 2023. But interest is spreading, so it's a work in progress. Basically, we had taken the approach that, if we build it, they will come kind of idea. And they being both additional landowners that would like to host stations, but then also researchers interested in working in the Hudson Valley and actually tagging animals within the region. We were just approached earlier this year by a local bird club that is interested in expanding the network into one of the Hudson Valley counties. So that's great, and it kind of speaks to this process of if we try to get the ball rolling, hopefully we can get others interested. In terms of any data at this point, to be able to assess kind of usage of the Valley corridor or any management implications, not quite there yet. We don't have enough to work with. It is very new. We've had a total of 30 detections to date at our stations in the Hudson Valley, 28 unique individuals, 16 different species of bird, and 1 species of bat. And these are the 16 bird species that we've detected. Just pulled out a couple conservation highlights. We did get the big-mouthed thrush, our mascot for today. So I'm very, very happy we could have that on the list. That wasn't planned. Also got a bank swallow and a rusty blackbird, which we were purple martin. Yeah, purple martin too. It's on there. It's on there. All happy to see all of those species. So yeah, and it's a very interesting mix. So we're happy with the results so far in terms of what we're seeing. None of the detections that we've had so far have been animals that were tagged within the region. They were all tagged in other states in the Northeast US or Canada. Or we did have a couple from the Southeast and Jamaica, I think was the furthest south. And just a couple interesting points, again, as we kind of dive into this data, drawing connections kind of both within the valley and outside of the valley. We've only had single station detections within the valley, so no animal was detected at multiple stations throughout the valley, suggesting that, you know, at least for these, they seem to be crossing the valley as opposed to using the valley as a corridor. We've started to try to piece together connections between, again, our National Reserve Network. How can we kind of bring our sites together, show that they're interconnected in many different ways? So these are just a couple examples of some birds that, you know, have appeared at multiple of our reserve sites on the East Coast. The example map on the right there is for the yellow-rumped warbler, which was tagged in Canada, came down through the Hudson Valley, picked up at our one of our stations, our North Point station, and eventually made its way down to the South Carolina Reserve, where this kind of all began for us. So it was a nice connection to make there. A couple other ones there, Swainson's thrush that appeared at the Maine Reserve, and also appeared in Hudson Valley. Purple martin and American woodcock also appeared at the New Jersey Reserve as well. So this is the kind of thing that we're interested in pursuing more of, how we can kind of draw connections between sites and different habitats. So what's next for our little Modus collaboration? We hope to continue spreading the word, again, to try to recruit more landowners, to host additional stations in the region, to get researchers interested in doing work within the region, tagging birds within the region. And then, so that's kind of at the local level. At the national scale, we've just started a project trying to synthesize MODIS data for all the near sites that have and operate MODIS stations at this point. Bring together all that data for research, education, and conservation, how we can show, again, kind of how our reserve sites are interconnected between regions, between habitats, and how it's all important to protect and conserve lands far afield, even if you don't think there's a direct connection there. With that, I will end there. Here's my contact information. This is our Hudson Valley MODIS collaboration project, number 572, if you want to look it up on MODIS. And happy to take any questions.
Next, we have Kaylin O'Connor. Kaylin O'Connor is a lecturer of wildlife ecology at Keene University, and she's a PhD candidate in environmental science at Montclair State University. And she is going to be talking to us about using the MODIS network to track migration of passerines raised or treated for traumatic brain injury in rehabilitation facilities. Welcome, Kaylin. Thanks.
Well, that saves me time on the title slide, so I can skip that one. How do we make this go to the next one? It's not just the arrow. I guess that, okay. So yeah, I am a lecturer of wildlife ecology, a bander, a rehabber. I've been rehabbing birds for about 20 years and banding for about 15. And in my rehab career, I've become increasingly interested in sort of the fate of what happens to these birds sort of after they leave the facility. Ones I've been especially interested in are those raised in captivity. So birds we get as nestlings or fledglings that then are raised and are, they leave the facility and we don't really know what happens to them afterwards. They're assumed to be fine, who knows? And I work a lot with window strike birds. And so I'm very interested in the birds that are like hitting windows but surviving. They get rehabilitated, they're released, we assume they're good to go, who knows? So I'm very interested in sort of maladaptive birds, and their potential migration is really what I'm looking at, like if that's going to be similar to control birds or not. So I will start with the captive raised birds. Kind of who cares? Like, okay, this is rehab, we're banders, what does this have to do with anything? Rehab centers do raise tens of thousands, potentially hundreds of thousands, because there's many centers and many individuals who do this across the United States alone. And then these birds are, getting out into the wild. They're part of our populations and whatnot. With notable exceptions, most rehabbers are not scientists. They are not studying what's happening to the birds. They're not even really studying what they're doing within the rehab centers. It tends to be a lot of very caring people that just want to do the best they can for wildlife. They learn how to rehab from other rehabbers. It's passed down. They're not necessarily associated with veterinary science, even like veterinarians are very different than rehabbers. So it's really well studied. There are professional organizations that have meetings like this that talk about best practices within the rehab centers, how to treat birds in the centers, how to get them through that program. But again, not what's happening to them afterwards. And some of these centers cost a tremendous amount of money to run. So the center I worked for a very long time cost $500,000 a year to run. So there's a lot of money going towards this, a lot of time, a lot of effort. So I'm sort of curious how much of this is sort of worthwhile, worth the time, worth the money, good for the birds. And if it's not, then potentially we can figure out why and improve that. So with rehab birds, captive raised birds, there's a lot of potential issues for these birds that might impact their survivability, ability to mate and reproduce, or their migration once they get out into the wild. Human interaction is a huge one. You're hand raising these baby birds. There's issues with imprinting, like you see in that picture, especially with corvids. There's unnatural diet, unnatural timing of being fed. You tend to stuff them full every 1 or 2 hours instead of having consistent feeding across the day. There's been studies in waterfowl that show this leads to all sorts of differences in your digestive system and potentially not recognizing natural food once they get outside. In that study, the survivorship over the winter was actually 0, but it's not well studied in passerines. In terms of mating, there's issues with not hearing the song of others of your species when you're at some critical period as a young bird. The two I'm most interested in is if you're being raised in a rehab center, you are not getting the natural photo period. A lot of birds use photo period as a cue physiologically to start preparing for migration. In a rehab center, lights go on in the morning, lights turn out at night. 8 to 8 was my center. That's not normal. That's 2 hours later than dawn. Are they getting a messed up photo period cue, which could affect migration? And they're not getting a view of the night sky. There's some pretty famous experiments in planetariums that show that young birds have to visualize the night sky to understand that the stars revolve around the North Star. They use the North Star for orientation and navigation. So if you're missing the light dark cycles, you're missing the view of the night sky, that could be highly problematic for you. So I just had 2 hypotheses here, that captive raised birds will have lower survivability, and will potentially show some aberrant migration patterns as well. So I just did a little pilot study. It's the first time I've kind of been looking into this and had the money for it. So I was able to tag 13 catbirds. I use low-tech nanotags. 13 catbirds and 20 robins, about equally split between captive raised and wild raised. So the wild ones were coming from my banding stations. And then in terms of what we got, I do have to make a note, many of you know, hatchier birds just kind of die a lot. In some species, up to 80% are dying before they get to the next year. So the fact that we don't have a ton of detections is not necessarily unexpected. So kind of throwing away a lot of nanotags when you study hatchier birds. But we were able to detect 4 of 7 of the wild catbirds, and all of them did sort of a normal catbird migration, which is down the coast, wind up somewhere in South Carolina or Georgia. We only got 1 of the 6 captive raised. These are small sample sizes, but you know, yikes. And he only made it to Maryland, so there's potentially some issue there. These are just 2 of our wild catbirds doing what catbirds do, very typical migratory routes for catbirds. And that's the 1 captive raised. All right, he got somewhere, so good for him, but you know, clearly not the same. The robins, all right, so robins were used because they're just very easy to find. In rehab, they're the vast majority of the birds you're raising because everybody finds them, right? They're in the suburbs, they're in your backyard. So I just used them because they're very available to me. But they're obviously not all migratory. It depends on age and population and weather conditions. And these guys weren't migrating at all. They were more sort of dispersing. So I did see 4 of the wild and 3 of the captive. The big difference here was timing. So the wild ones, they went north into New York State or west into Pennsylvania very quickly. It's like they were tagged, within a month they were out of there. The 3 captive raised ones hung out pretty close to where the station is. They went a little bit south to Duke Farms and just hung out there, kept pinging that. One of them just moved to Pennsylvania this month. Like he finally got his act together and moved away. So here's, you know, a tip of like 2 of the birds took sort of this route to Pennsylvania, the wild ones, and 2 went north to New York. And then that's the one that kind of hung out at Duke Farms for a while and just came towards Allentown very recently. So suffice it to say, with this very small pilot study, catbirds not so great. A huge significant difference in what we were finding there. American robins may be equal, but they're doing different things in terms of timing. So I'm going to keep working on this part. There's potentially something going on that is worth looking into in the rehab center. The next step would maybe be figuring out what, but that will, you know, be in the distant future. So that's all I'm saying about the rehab birds for now. Window strike birds this is my baby. This is my dissertation stuff, actually. So I've been doing this for a few years. A lot of you, I'm sure, know that window strikes are the biggest direct factor of avian mortality in the world, killing billion or more birds per year worldwide. And those estimates, which are already insane, are based on dead birds. You know, they hit a building, they're dead, but many other birds hit a building and survive, are brought to rehabbers or fly away. And it's like, what's happening to those birds? Are they okay? There's not a lot of information on this in wild birds, and there's very little information on it at all. Like you can find some stuff on like parrots, people's pet parrots that flew into their window in veterinary medical journals, but not really a lot. So potential issues that you would think could be happening to these birds would be traumatic brain injury. Obviously, they're smashing their head into a window. So if they have injuries to parts of the brain that are responsible for orientation, navigation, that's clearly going to affect their migration. Or they can have eye injuries, just literally partial blindness, maybe their retina detaching. Birds sense magnetic fields. They can see magnetic fields with their retina, so that could be problematic. So that's a lot. You don't have to read all that. Basically, I had 2 hypotheses here. Window struck birds that survive fall into roughly 2 categories. The ones that we call them had their bell rung. They hit a window, they're kind of in a daze for a couple of hours, and then they fly away and seem normal. I still hypothesize that potentially they're not doing super great, that they will have maybe sustained some sort of injury. There's other birds that require long-term care and rehab. Like they are being force-fed because they're incapable of eating on their own. They're being given anti-inflammatories like Metacam to reduce brain swelling. They might need weeks or months in rehab. So my hypothesis there would be they're really not doing well, right? Like they may have significant injuries that would affect them quite poorly. So I have a long-term study site of just a window strike monitoring. So I get a bunch of birds that I personally rehab from this college in northern New Jersey that has all mirrored glass. So that's, you're looking at the actual building there. So clearly that kills a ridiculous amount of birds, and no, they're not willing to fix it. So we can talk about that another time. A lot of my other birds come from a very large city in New Jersey. New Jersey Audubon has a long-term monitoring project here, and they transport birds to the center I'm associated with, the rehab center. So I get a lot of birds from those sites. These are the main bad buildings that are killing birds in Newark. And then I get my control birds from my banding station in the New Jersey Meadowlands. It's kind of salt marsh shrub, and then I have a woodland station as well, so I can kind of cover multiple species depending on what I want to do with this. For all the window strike stuff, I only use adult birds. As I said before, I don't really want to throw away nano tags on the hatch ears. They're all dying anyway, so I would prefer experienced migrants that have at least survived through the year, have already done a migration, so I'll get better detections of them. And just for my own, I like to do the bigger birds, better fat content. It makes me feel better that they're going to be okay and not have any issues with the nano tag. So they were all good migratory condition birds, like nice fat. For me, that's three fat or above if you scale fat. So just to quickly summarize, basically, if you were here last year, what I presented last year, just as a background, I did a pilot study deploying 50 nanotags on just catbirds and song sparrows over the course of 2 years. The first year, it was maybe 15 tags. I just wanted to see that this would even work. And then 2 years ago, I put more. 6 from each group was window strike. You get what you get at the window strike sites. I can't really control who I'm going to get, unfortunately, and whether or not they will be adults and in good migratory condition. This was to test the first hypothesis, meaning these birds were all released same day from the Raptor Trust, the rehab center, with no treatment whatsoever. They were transported there. They seemed fine, so they stuck them in an aviary, made sure they could fly, and off they went. So no treatment at all on these guys that had their bell rung group. And for catbirds, we had almost all of them detected, including all 6 window strikes. And for the song sparrows, they're, again, just less migratory. And we actually discovered later they had mostly completed their migration by the time they got through New Jersey, because we saw some northern migration later. Whatever, we got 14 to 22 of them, including half of the window strike birds. You can see that these are pretty similar maps. The catbirds, all of them were fine, in quotes, just meaning that they migrated as you would expect them to migrate. Similar timing, similar distance, hitting similar stations. With the song sparrows, I am specifically using these 2 images because this was a control bird and a window struck bird that were tagged on the same day, and they actually wound up at the exact same receiver on the same day. So like literally the same, like they're doing the same thing. They're fine. Again, I'm putting it in quotes because this is, I can't know that after this they're better and nothing else happened. But so far we're rejecting the first hypothesis. Again, small sample sizes, 6 song sparrows, 6 catbirds that had hit windows versus a bunch of controls. But I'm not seeing a significant difference so far, which I love because in rehab in general, our mantra is sort of, if it can fly, leave it alone. Like you don't need to go chasing around birds, like it's stressful for them. Transport is stressful. Dealing with humans is stressful. Rehab is stressful. If they don't need to go to rehab, don't bring them to rehab. And that is counter to what several significant organizations and several big rehab centers say, which tell people to chase around these poor birds until they're basically exhausted just to get them into treatment because you have to give them Medicam for 3 days. And it's like, why are you doing this if you don't have to? So I can complain about that more another time. So I expanded this study last year to include water thrushes. So warblers, not water thrushes specifically, but warblers as a group, several of them are super colliders with window strikes. It would be great if I had access to black and white warblers, black-throated blue warblers. These hit windows a lot. I don't have access to them. I do have a lot of access to water thrush at both the window strike sites and at the rehab center. Or at my station. So we used them. We tried to use some white-throated sparrows, tried Swainson's thrush, that didn't work. And then I expanded the catbirds and song sparrows to the ones that were in rehab for the longer period of time. So now I'm testing that second hypothesis about if ostensibly they are more injured because they are taking a long time to recover at a rehab center. Are they messed up then? Like, did they have a poor migration? So starting with the water thrush, these were same day releases. So we're back to that hypothesis one, like just they hit a window, they fly away, no treatment. We, again, only had a sample size of 6 window struck. Well, I don't want to say I wish I could get more. I don't. That would feel terrible. But we had 6 of them. 2 of them did a normal migration. 2 of them wandered west, like just into Western New Jersey or Western Pennsylvania. I don't really know what to make of that yet, only because that is something that a bunch of other species do, not generally warblers though. All 14 of the control out of 23 that we got did have an expected migration, and expected for them is similar to catbirds, just that typical neotropical migrant, like you see them go down the coast. So that's a typical control bird. You have one of the 2 window struck that did a typical migration, and then you have one just sort of wandering off a little bit. That's probably not the best. With the birds, the only numbers that I think really matter here are the 64% of window struck and the 86% of controls. There is a difference on timing with catbird migration. If you, I discovered from the first 2 years of this study, if you tag catbirds later in the season, they just do not travel as far south. They wind up going to Virginia or Maryland and hanging out there. I think they're just from more northern populations. So by the time they're coming through my state, they're almost done with their migration. So I am going to consider those shorter migratory movements to be like normal. So I think I saw 64% normal migratory movement in the window struck catbirds that had been severely injured. So many weeks in rehab minimum, definitely getting Metacam, which is an anti-inflammatory to reduce brain swelling, versus the control. So there is a significant difference there, clearly, 64 to 86. However, 64% doing normal migration still isn't terrible. I mean, that's pretty good for sustaining a pretty significant brain injury. So here's a control. I maybe shouldn't have used the one that went the furthest. I don't usually get them pinging in Florida. Normally, the controls would land in South Carolina, Georgia. There's a window struck that was fine. And that last map is just typical of any late migrant. So if I'm tagging a catbird in like mid-October, that's what you're going to see. It's going to move to only like the DC area. So that would be what the maps looked like for whether it was window struck or whether it was a control. With the song sparrows, I couldn't really do it because we wound up only having 2 birds that had long-term injuries. I mean, so I did tag them, did not detect either one. Again, super small sample size. I will mention that we do see sparrows, especially, moving inland for migration instead of south. I found that a lot in the previous 2 years as well. About half the song sparrows go west, not south. So that kind of looks like this, and we see that with a lot of song sparrows. That's just to say it's normal. When we did the same thing with white-throated sparrows, we did have a bunch of them go west, whether it was control or the one experimental that we found. Again, small sample sizes on this. We only had 3 window strikes. They don't move very far, but obviously white-throated sparrows are in my state in the winter. So we're going to flip this and do this in the spring so that hopefully we can see greater migratory movement and actually do more with this species, because white-throated sparrows are a super collider. Like, they are very well known for hitting windows, and I would like actual data on this species. I wound up only tagging 2 Swainson's thrushes because they take the same tags as my catbirds, and I was biasing towards catbirds just to see if I could detect them. I didn't detect them very far, so I'm not sure I'm actually going to use them going forward. I think I'm switching to Veery, which I have a lot of access to, and wood thrush, which forget which association, I think it's just New Jersey Fish and Wildlife is doing a big wood thrush study and asked if we would kind of get on board, and they're going to provide the tag. So I'm like, sure, that sounds awesome. And we're going to stick with Savannah sparrows because they're of conservation concern in my state. So that's pretty much it for me. Thank you to my schools and to everybody that houses one of my stations, and to the rehab centers and all my sub-permittees and dissertation staff and whatnot. That is my email. That's our station Instagram, where I post a lot of stuff about here. And if you have any questions, please let me know.